I'm Linda Tuck-Chapman. I'm CEO of Third Party Risk Institute. And our real true passion is training and education for professionals. So we do a certification program, Certified Third Party Risk Management Professional, certificate programs, which are obviously much shorter and they're much more targeted. So we have a number of those. And we also have a skills and knowledge assessment for third party risk management. So I've written a couple of books. I'm just updating my first book to its third edition. Yes. and I'm hoping to get finished that soon because I'd like to write a third book on the governance elements of third party risk management. So anyhow, so I'll probably be reaching out into my network when I get to that book because I think it's a topic that hasn't been written about. So anyhow, that's me. And I'm so happy to welcome my guest, Stanley Lee. So Stanley, if you could tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and also tell us a little bit about NetSwitch, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm Stanley Lee, and CEO and founder of NetSwitch, and also another company in Hong Kong called Securely in the Asia Pacific. So I started as a cable puller 30 years ago. And prior to that, I've been before age of 18, I lived in 3 different continents, born in Hong Kong, educated formative year, educated in England before family migrated to United States, been into San Francisco for 40 years. So this is where my journey began as a businessman. And when I come over here and I come, like studying, what should I study? I don't know. I like technology. Love tinkling around with technology. But I also want to be a business person. I want to have my own global international business before age of 30. That was my dream. It didn't happen until 34, but it wasn't that bad, So prior to that, I was... Well, coming from a family that my parents only had 4 years altogether, 4-year education between both of them, that was a little challenging. And that's why I volunteer a lot and go back into career development, workforce development, and part of what we do in the cyber risk governance, that's the patent I wrote during the COVID time, is because to try to educate, our community. And we know one of the area the challenge is the knowledge level, whether it's technical or business oriented. There's everybody has a different expertise and a different path. And then going back into where I coming from, don't know what business to do, don't know which area to get into. So all of that ties into what we're doing today in the cyber risk governance, and why we're having this conversation is to educating our audience. From the lowest level, I even, go share my knowledge why cybersecurity is important to kindergarteners. How should they be aware of it? And that's why our first vision is really how to elevate connaissance, the awareness and knowledge level. And then applying the technology into, go ahead.
Yep, so I'm going to pause there. I just want to say that this is a conversation. I should have mentioned this. We're not muting you centrally. So if you have a question, you either put your hand up or just, I can see microphones. Please join in the conversation because this is an Ask the Expert, right? So I'm gonna ask Stanley a ton of questions. We had a lot of fun preparing for this because there's just so much to talk about. And Stanley really is an expert. I mean, he's been in this for decades, and you can never know too much about cybersecurity and third-party risk. So how about if we just switch gears a little bit, because I clearly we're both passionate about sharing knowledge. So I want to talk about a few things today. I want to talk about obviously AI and third-party risk because it's like the topic, but I want to get more below the surface so it's not too superficial, because all the superficialities, we've covered that already, right, in what we read. I do want to talk a little bit about quantum computing today, Stanley, because it's coming on stream. I don't really understand it myself, but I read things that I'm going, holy moly, I really don't understand. Right. I want to talk about I'm a former chief procurement officer and head third-party risk in 3 very large financial institutions. I never really used to worry too much about supply chain because most of what we bought are 6 to 8 billion a year with services, not too much on the goods side. Right. But now we've got these software bills of material, which are they're actually software supply chain. I would like to cover that today. And then very importantly about the people element of this, the human in the loop. So we got a lot of broad topics. Please, everybody who's joined us today, Ask whatever you like. We are recording this because we put it on our YouTube channel, and we will share it with Stanley. We may, but so you can either identify yourself or not, and when you ask a question, or you can just put it in the chat, and then if you don't want to be identified, put it in the chat, and I won't say who asked the question. Okay, so let's start first of all with the underlying technologies. I mean, we know that AI is not, it's not just one thing, right? There's the technologies, there are the models and the algorithms, and then there's of course all of the data sources. Without those three things, you don't have AI. So can you talk a little bit about, well, what are the technologies, and are any of these new, or are they just combinations of old things that we already know?
Yeah, so about AI first, right? So this is the conversation. So but tied it into my background. Sorry for the lengthy background. So summarize it to today. What we try to build is a system called cyber risk governance. We're using A, B, C, D plus the E. So A is the AI, obviously. It's been around since 1950s starting, and then into the 60s, and it went up and down several cycles because of the practicality is what's going on. Until today, we have the computing power, the cost based on the Moore's law, the cost of computing power is now vastly available, and of course within the cloud infrastructure that makes it more accessible to a lot of people. So that's where they start with the AI. Sorry.
No, I would say good point. Good point. Basically, that sort of what allowed this to accelerate. Without a doubt, it is in fact the cost of computing. It is probably the number one factor.
Right, and also cost the cloud infrastructure that allow ChatGPT, Google, and then they can operating all of this within the cloud environment. So that's where AI, but now of course we know is the LLM, large language model. But there are lots of other different models within the artificial intelligence, and that's where they're picking up right now. And if we can use it for free, that's the starting point. But when we started only a few years ago, we didn't know that it can be so accessible. So the cost is prohibiting a lot of business like ourselves to dive into it. And then also the way that we look at AI is we worry about what's going on with the AI hallucinations, the error being made, garbage in, garbage out, just simply said. And then that's why we already, looking into the reinforcement learning, what we call it the AI square, the artificial intelligence and augmented intelligence, also referred as human in the loop. So the AI square is really the principle we are applying how we build our product. And of course, tied into what you said earlier, Linda, about the data. And there are plenty of research talk about where's the data coming from related to cybersecurity or AI governance, and also part of the, the ethical AI governance, AI explainability. Those are the three larger topics still being debated around the world. And
okay,
in fact,
I'm just gonna pause there, because I think if we can separate in our own minds, there are technologies, right? There's large language models you mentioned. There is there's cognitive computing. There's robotic process automation. Like there's this whole tech stack that you have to have in order to have AI exist at all. Right. So, and those have advanced quite a lot in recent years. So I've done a fair amount of talks on this as well. I, sort of go through the long list of what we do know. There are some things that, can you explain what a neural network is? Is that a fair question?
Sure. Yeah, it is part of the modeling, if you may, right? But of course, that's the type of the complexity comes in with how they overlapping each other. Neural network or deep Q network or TensorFlow. These are part of the modeling, if you may, and it's getting technical that beyond my expertise that can explain.
Okay, so is it part of the architecture? Because if you look at it, you've got on one hand, you've got all this technology, right? So all these things that we've learned over the last few years, and then we're adding some new things to it. Then we've got what I would call in models, because I'm a purist, being a risk expert, is model risk. So in my first book, I actually spent a huge amount of time researching models and model risks. Those are more commonly known as algorithms, right? So the algorithms basically are that the structure of the thinking behind how AI is powered. So the models and the model risks themselves are really undervalued when people are assessing risk, because they don't necessarily think about the models, and yet they should. So I wrote a whole chapter on this, so I won't belabor it, but it's in my first book. And as I go through my update, I'm probably not going to make a lot of changes to it, because the model is a model is a model, but it's basically how models are being used. And then the third thing you just talked about, of course, is the choice of data, right? And that's where the combination of models and data end up with these biases. So you also
And you're
mentioned the
right
word,
on is how it's being used. I think that's the key point, how it's being used, right? So
yeah,
that's what ChatGPT kind of disrupting this whole trend, because
yeah,
as we were building the algorithm in that part of the process, all of a sudden, in 2023, ChatGPT exploded, as we know,
right.
as to where, and even continue to grow today with DeepSeek is another one. It's on the,
Mhm.
so all of these is all of a sudden that creating a lot of companies starting what they refer as AI. But then go back into what you're referring, the model, the architecture, the algorithm. These
Yeah.
exactly is like the SBOM within, the software bill of material that you touched on earlier. What is behind all this modeling or the algorithm? And that is
Exactly.
driving, the errors or the hallucinations that nowadays we all so busy. We jump into it. And in fact, that we're putting together an event in San Francisco State University and talking about this type of AI, how does it applicable to business, not just on
Okay.
the governing side and the practical side that you refer to.
Yeah, and it's putting the pieces together. I think if you don't understand what the components are, you can't understand the whole. And that's really why I wanted
Known
to
the
spend some
unknown,
time
right?
on
We
this.
got to know the
Yeah,
unknowns. Yeah.
yeah. So one of the things that I teach is Johari's window. So this is a little bit of a side trip. This is really a thinking tool. So Johari's window has 4 panes. It's a critical thinking tool because I love the concept of critical thinking. So the first pane of 4 in the window is you know what you know. The second pane is you know what you don't know, right? So that's basically, those are pretty straightforward. Then you don't know what you do know, and that's basically a fish swimming in water, right? We have a lot of assumptions and we don't necessarily articulate what we do know. And you'll find that in dealing with clients or in discussions around AI. And the last window is you don't know what you don't know. That's always the one I want to get the other windows basically sort of dealt with so I can get to that one. And that's basically, it's a critical thinking tool. And I think it applies very nicely to AI, because we just talk, you know these technologies, some of them you know well, and some of them your risk experts understand, or your tech experts, they know them well, they understand, right? The models, I doubt if people really understand models unless they're in a bank or an insurance company, because they have model risk groups. So the models themselves are secret sauce, and that is very tricky. So how do you even know what's in the sauce and whether or not there's bias or what's going to work,
Well, you
right? I
talked
hear you
about
laughing. What do you think?
insurance, or you talk
Yeah.
about insurance. That touch on my conversation with some of the largest, the global insurance. I asked this question back in 2018, 2019. How do you underwrite cybersecurity insurance policies when you don't even access or even know what kind of risk that you're incurring when you issue that policy?
Good question.
They didn't know how to answer it. And then that's why that when that point and start to me is you can same thing with an organization, any organization. How do you know about when do you spend enough money, we'll go back into the practical, into
Mhm.
any solutions, of when do you stop investing into that solution to address some of the compliance and regulatory requirement?
Right.
What kind of metrics do you use? How do you know what is enough, or when it's go back into the 4 quadrants of knowing the unknown from what I refer to, and then
Mhm.
break it down into those details and measure that
Yeah.
on an ongoing basis. And that same thing, I think Luis asked a question, posted the questions
Oh,
about,
sorry.
the
Yeah, I'm
framework
reading.
and
Yeah,
third-party controls. And the same thing with that,
yeah,
your organization, any of us sitting in here, working with third-party risk,
yeah,
third-party supply chain. But
yeah.
how do we know that they're doing what they're supposed to do? So when something happened we get a cyber attack, we can follow the trail and look at the compliance evidence, say, hey, we did our best and to mitigate this type of risk. And so give us a break, the regulators, right? And we have been showing and even addressing into the cyber insurance, hey, these are the things that we have done, give us some help at that point after we get hacked. Then, how can we claim the insurance policy rather than fighting it at that point in time? So these are the things that, again, within this last few years has changed drastically. Now we're adding AI into it. So for the businesses who plan to use AI, how does that risk mitigation comes in?
Well, and so more specifically to the question, when my thinking around this is because third-party risk is where my expertise lies, is first of all, during your intake process, your risk identification questions, first of all, have to recognize that there is AI being used, which means you have to define what you mean. And usually when I've worked with organizations as a consultant, we've also tried to break down use cases, what their purpose is, those types of things, so that when during the intake process, you know what the business is proposing to sign up for. Then typically what happens is where there's a model present, which there always is in AI, it goes off to the model risk people, if you have a model risk group, to have a look at the model itself. If you don't have a model risk group and you're using a lot of technology, and a lot of data, critical processes, I did some research to figure out, well, now what do you do if you don't have a model risk department? And so there are likely others out there, but I will mention one, IBM Watson, which you remember Big Blue for chess, is now being used for model risk assessment. So if you've got a big hairy one where it could have a huge impact on your organization when it affect a lot of customers or a lot of revenue, I would suggest you get an independent view of the model itself, because you may not know all the secret sauce, but you can test the model with a third party if you don't have a model risk department. The rest of it, of course, is the technology component of it. And so that, I think most organizations do have controls around that and they can understand it. And last but not least is, why do they need that data? How do they choose the data? How are they managing the data? How are they protecting the data? So I think to you answer your question, Louise, basically the component parts, once you start to break them down, you'll recognize the control framework and the control environment that you expect based on your current practices. You just have to apply it a little bit differently. And to Stanley's point, how much do you invest in this? Right, so I'm going to turn it back to you just to continue, Stanley, because I don't mean to keep interrupting, but I do want to just answer the questions and try to get to the specifics, so people have something to take back to the ranch, right? So
absolutely. Value added. We talked about that. Well, how can we add value for everyone? So go back into the first thing we always talk about is the inventory, as simple as that, right? So you have touched on that. Knowing the unknown from our 3 steps to care, is knowing the unknown, the building block, and measure and monitoring. So knowing the unknown is the very first thing that we look at. How do we know? And part of that related to cybersecurity, it's like the hackers or the adversary might be already in your network environment. And that's it, and Verizon, talk about it every year. They come out with that statistics and talk about, 200 days that they, in sitting very stealthily within network. And now, of course, it's being improved. It's getting better and better. I don't have the statistics because, like you said, it changes so fast, and I don't keep up with those statistics anymore. But we know there's still a lot of organization globally that they don't do regularly inventory. And what that means is, how do we know that the hacker did not build a server or a virtual server and actually operating just like part of your company's staff within your network environment and start collecting what they need to, the reconnaissance, following the cyber kill chains and waiting for the right moment to weaponize their attacks. Or they just could be sitting in there as a third party. We know the biggest case that, 2013 Target using an HVAC contractor and they didn't go after target directly, but they went into the HVAC vendors and sit in there and start collecting how they transactioning with a target. And then once they find a hole and find a way to get into target, that's when the executions of weaponization and execution started.
Yeah,
And
so
take over the command.
yeah, I do want to hop in here because Target, without a doubt, we teach Target in Certified Third-Party Risk Management Professional for that very reason. It was the first of its kind. But I think about what you're saying around getting in the environment, staying there, and basically setting up a separate infrastructure inside your organization without your knowledge. And I'm thinking about SolarWinds, right? So SolarWinds was in 2023, so 10 years later.
2020, yeah.
Or 2020, you're quite right. Yeah, so SolarWinds. So can you talk about how do you protect yourself from those kinds of things?
Yeah,
And you
so
use AI to detect them.
oh, absolutely. AI can be very helpful, and AI has been deployed within the SIM environment, which is Security Information Event Management. And that has been, we have been partnered with vendor and build this type of solutions, and then using AI to reduce the false positive. And
So
that is
yeah, so let me just understand, because I'm not a super technical person. So
Right.
would you build an AI application to basically crawl through your network and look for anomalies?
Well, you know what? If you're going into that extent to build one, I don't think it's necessary anymore. So that's why that within the last couple of years, now these area has been exploding into different
Right.
AI solutions. You know, it's like if you're not in software development, why would you? Same thing with our philosophy. If we can integrate the leading edge technology at a reasonable
Right.
cost, why should we? It's same thing with the open source on the other spectrum. Open
Right.
source has been around. People say, oh, I don't trust it. I don't trust it. But when you're adding the layers and layers of different overlapping and look at the cost perspective, open source is not that bad. Of course, it takes a little bit of work, and that's why we built this for some of nonprofit and small as an integrated platform as a service. And we, as an open source, we share that to the community.
Right.
And there is, it's not out there yet, and we're still testing it and we're still working on it. But mainly is to get some of the small organizations some tools to start this journey, and using the data analytic to measure the, how much you invest into it. And so back into what I developing AI for that particular usage.
Yeah.
No, not at this point. There are a lot of people focusing on AI. We're focusing on integrations to reduce the cost of development, very simply say, right? And then over time, then of course that we have to add our augmented intelligence, the other AI, into the piece, because no organization are the same. Every organization is different, and this is what we refer as domain specific.
Right.
And the reasoning, to making sure that the reasoning ties into this organization, my organization's domain specific, to increase the accuracy. So artificial intelligence is go for the speed, augmented intelligence go for the accuracy.
Okay, so I'm just going to suggest that, I mean, this is a very good use of third-party tools. And so back to the something you raised earlier about how much work effort you put into certain solutions, right? Because some of them you're going to put in a lot, but you think about this one where you're introducing AI, third-party AI products to actually help you manage the security of your network. You do want to spend a lot of time on those ones and make sure they're secure, right? So it's
trust
sort
but
of
verify, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, and actually I was going to bring that up, that trust but verify. In this case, basically, it is doing as much homework as you can to make sure that it is a safe tool. And that's why you need things like software bill of materials, for example, to understand the component parts. So can we just switch gears a little bit about an SBOM? Can you describe what an SBOM, a software bill of materials, is?
Yeah, and so I think most of us know bill of materials already, but and then within the software, that's where and it's part of that is we got to know the third party. How do they build? And that ties into Log4j as part of the hacks. One of the big hackers, Log4j,
Right.
which is open source, which is an open source protocol that it built on millions of users and device, because they have built it into they use it in a lot of application development. So Log4j is one of the perfect one to talk about software bill of material. So how does the organization use of Log4j track the use of the Log4j within their applications? And that goes back into the inventory. Can they track all these components such as like Log4j or JavaScript or React, or even now some of the AI coding, generated coding? And these are the inventory, the bill of material that developing my software. Within those components, such as Log4j, which is developed by a community, and we apply it into it, and then that's how we build our application. How do we track it? How do we constantly verify the version of Log4j does not have vulnerability within itself, or the backdoors that been written that basically people can gain access? And that's what the adversary do all the time. They look for these type of bill of materials and see which one is the weakest link and mostly widely used. And then they put a backdoor into it. And that's when the next version comes, and being like a poison pill, then it basically get the whole application polluted.
Which is exactly what happened with SolarWinds, right? It was an update to an existing trusted product that introduced some pretty bad stuff. So now, where would you, it's always a great debate with the software bill of materials, where would you suggest they put that? Is that associated with the record for the third party? Or do you put it in the technology department? Where do you put these things? Because the inventory is incredibly important, and it is tied to the third party product. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this is where we start working on these, part of the penetration testing. Lots of people heard about penetration testing, but we defined there's 6 different type of penetration testing. So this is one of them, is called a code source review. Yeah. So these are the way, and back then it's really going through line by line and looking at the code source. Now it's a lot different and thank you for AI in that sense. And also, but what we do is we put that onto, again, the subject matter expertise. In our case, we put that into GitHub. So open source, lots of people using GitHub as a platform to share code and the depository.
And it has been hacked, just FYI.
Well, you know what? We know it's not, if you're going to get hacked is when you're going to get hacked, right? So these are the things that now it's getting to the point that we have to I'm getting numb of, all this hacking news, even though we put out a newsletter on a weekly basis. Sometimes I look at, oh my goodness, that they could have done this and that, and to avoid this type of things. But you know what? Hindsight is always 20/20. But back into where we, evaluate it. So we leave that into GitHub securities. GitHub has its own security to review the code and making sure that it's not being. So this is we validate and verify by third party. In our case, we use GitHub security for that purpose, and anybody who has a GitHub account can run that through again. GitHub security can run that through again to making sure that at least according to GitHub, is safe for deployment.
Yeah,
and that's how we mitigate.
Advice.
Yeah,
and this is great advice. Yeah, because if you don't have the SBOM, you can't do these things, and therefore, when there is a risk event, there's just so many of them every day. To your point, how do you even know that your organization has been compromised, right? So,
well, also, to balance the cost, right? So we use third-party developer as well, and this is the part is I don't know that third-party developer how good of a job that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. Yes, my team might know, but at the end of the day, we got to trust but verify. Who do we verify it with. So we got to find the subject matter expertise, and that's why we talk about building, hey, we are very horizontal on the bottom. How can we pull the data and start building up on top at the same time, the expertise like yourself, Linda, looking at the third-party risk coming from the top, working with the board of director, the C-suite, defining the KPI, defining the objective. Then this is how we can meet in the middle. And that is where the resilience maturity starts to come in, because you basically aggregating a more holistic approach from the stakeholders, rather than just one side keep talking about technology, the other side keep talking about legal. It will go nowhere. It go nowhere.
Yeah, you're right. And never the way shall be made, but they should. And there is a question, but I just want to go back. You talked about GitHub. I mean, having sources to look at it and basically referenceables or trusted sources to help you. GitHub is very helpful. I wanted to ask you, can you talk to Huggable or to MITRE? Those are two for AI. Are you familiar with those ones?
No, I'm not familiar with
those
ones.
No, I think it's called Hugface. Hugface basically is a community, and it basically what they're looking at, they're basically trying to understand AI and the AI risks. And then MITRE is a very, very complicated database of AI tools that you can refer to, and you can use this as something to augment your due diligence, right? So your technology people would probably be involved in these or know about them. And I think maybe what we'll do, Arsh, who works with me, is at the end we'll send out some materials on reference sources that you could maybe share with your organization, which are sources of information that can help you. You mentioned also NIST.
Are you referring to MITRE ATT&CK?
That's what I meant. MITRE ATT&CK. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So that we use all the time, because that is basically providing the fundamental structure on the cyber kill chain I was referring to. So that MITRE ATT&CK, MITRE.org. Yes, that's what we base out of. I think that pretty much all of the cybersecurity company are based on that structure to start defining. But if you look at the interactive map online with the MITRE.org, then you see that it's covering a lot of areas. And again, this is why we need to build out this open source and looking at the data. And using this data to look at, okay, where are the overlapping and where are the gaps on the other side, right? So, and then this is where that the operational effectiveness and cost efficiency comes in, not just from top down, bottom up. Now we got the horizontal axles. How do we, like you have referring to the 4 quadrants, how can we prioritize? It's as simple as, where do we prioritize? And every organization is different. Right. And so this is why that sometimes that we cannot look at all those applications being developed out there. And there are a lot of course, what we refer as acronym battle. It's like when you see technology company coming up with the new terms, not necessarily is the greatest, and it might be something that they've been using some of the open source and then develop to where they are, and they just put a new label onto it. We've seen that before. And then of course on the other side of it, where the compliance has a lot of acronym or legal verbiage that the technologists would not necessarily able to understand. And these are the areas that go back into your MITRE ATT&CK map, and we uses that to follow that as a fundamental. How do we construct? What we did is we construct a 6 principles, and as a part of our defense in depth, and that is important for any organizations. Need to look at from the top perspective, what kind of organization, what industry, what kind of compliance they need wherever they operating. And some of our clients are global clients, so they have to operate in multiple regulatory issues. Or some of them, they just going into, into expanding into a certain criteria and a certain geographic area, that might becomes a higher priority than their headquarters.
Right.
So that is the compliance requirement that we need to look at.
But there's also, we have a question about this, and I did want to bring up the AI ethics, right? So we know that there really are not laws around this, and there are not even specific regulations yet around AI. But there are organizations working together. So there's a question with what are significant issues or points to build into your AI ethics program?
Very interesting conversations. And of course, I'm not the subject matter expertise on it either. And they touch on the entropies and, lots of area that goes into the AI ethical in the discussion worldwide.
Yes.
I start getting involved in that, which again, I'm not a subject matter expertise, partnering with university, learning through our professors, the different university. And this one started about 5-6 years ago, and Scott David, who was the executive in the University of Washington, into the applied science, and he's really into that from a legal perspective. And NIST always have this conversation going on. And AI Act in EU, it's more of now it's the leading edge at this point in time with the AI Act initiative to talk about ethical governance and explainability in different conversations. Where it comes down to
there are some global organizations trying to put this together, and I'm trying to remember where I saw that. It might be Basel, which is working on this from basically because ethics will kind of span the globe. We're not specific to any company or country. And so there is a working group that's trying to put together sort of an AI ethical framework. And I just can't recall, but I think I saw it through Basel Committee. So I think if you just do your Google online search, you'll probably run into them.
Talk to AI. That's what I do, right? So then it goes back into exactly like you said that I was going to lead to is the industrial specific. Industrial specific. Then it goes into the organization themselves. It's like some still fighting the use of AI, from what I know, including some of the universities, still debating the usage of it at this point. Forget about ethical and explainability in the practical sense, in the deployment sense, right? So these are the things that are still in very, active discussions worldwide. And the guardrail, we all understand that, the worst part is going to happen is AI is going to take over human. Let's get the elephant out of the room, right? Or AI
human in the loop. Yep.
Yeah, well, and that's where AI square, I keep talking about it. It's like, how do you add the human into the loop to make sure that you have that guardrail? Despite all the legal terminologies or legal structures in there, I think at the end of the day is how the organization, each of the organization itself, to provide that kind of governance into that process. A tool is a tool is a tool. So you can use a screwdriver to fix something at your home. You can use a screwdriver to do crimes, right? So these are the things I say, how are you gonna look at that tool and then applying the augmented intelligence, the human into the loop to make sure that you have it's being properly used. At the same time, you go back into trust but verify. So we look at the AI tool being deployed. What kind of KPI? That's where, Linda, you come in and define that with the executives and come back, okay, these are the KPI I want to measure. Whether it's right or wrong from a bottom-up perspective, I'm just looking at 0 and 1s. What does this AI tool contributing to those objectives up on the top? Are they aligning with the management's objective, their task and the visions? Are we including the conversation from communications, collaborations into what we refer as customization? How can we customize this tool to apply it into what we do on a daily basis? Not necessarily the business executive is going to use that tool on a daily basis, but if investment being spent into it, then they should know what kind of KPI, because what kind of KPI would define it into their ROI. And is what.
Yeah. And you know what I find interesting about this? I think back when I was a senior executive in a bank, I was super procurement officer and head of third-party risk. I remember reporting to executive committee on basically the use of outsourcing, right, and offshoring. And really, where were the guardrails? And this is within more than one bank that I had this at the most senior levels, because even at that level, they want to have some consensus on what are the guardrails, to your point, Stanley. What are the guardrails for our organization? I remember a long time ago, somebody said, well, we would, outsource, XYZ process, but we wouldn't outsource a branch. Why not? Right? So trying to define the guardrails. So I think back to the last time I was in corporate, there was a very, very large risk event involving some offshoring and another bank, not us. So I had to keep going back to report to management committee. I had about 6 or 8 meetings pretty close together. And I ended up working with one executive that had strategy to help to define what do we think our principles were as an organization around offshoring work, offshoring jobs. And so what were the principles we would live by? And I think that it's the same conversation, slightly different topic, because we're once again talking about the use of AI, its impact on our customers, and its impact on our people. And what do we think about that? I think this is not a new conversation. I think it's a similar conversation to one you've already had. And if you have the great good fortune to have access to executive management, I have to say they're thinking these things too. And if you can bring a point of view that starts a good conversation around defining those things at that level, what you're going to do is align to the organization's risk appetite, and they're thinking about what's acceptable for the organization, right? To me, getting up to that senior level, if you've got a way to get there or send somebody to help them prepare for that conversation, my experience is at the most senior levels, these are the conversations they enjoy the most, right? Mostly what gets presented to them is a bunch of data and facts, right?
Yeah,
This is a real conversation, right?
and you're right on, and while you're talking about, one of the research that I have done is quoting Oxford University's research in 2023. 72% of the CEO are still undecided what to do with cybersecurity. That's a big number, and it's very recent. That I know. Yeah, that's
what does that even mean? What do you mean don't know what to do with it? Like I don't even know what that's about.
Yeah, and that would be a subject of deeper research. I think that it did Oxford University. If it breaks it down into and then kind of summarize. That's what it captured my eyes and started.
I'm going to go find that study if it's
I'll
available.
send it to you, and I'll send it to you.
I would love
I'll
to
send
read
it to you, and then yeah. So this is the part that is really mind-boggling. But and then at the same time, from the practical perspective, I start, flashback and thinking about all this experience, all this conversation. I talk to, publicly trading companies, CEO, CFO, COO, CIO, CISOs, you name it, all the C-suite.
They all have C's on front of their name. Yep, I get that.
So the challenge with that, and that's why we're building this community, why we're having this discussion, is the interpretation. Everybody coming in the C-suites, how they interpreting the word cybersecurity, it's a little bit different. Most of them, they think is technical related. Some talk about as a risk. It is a risk. Then it goes back into what you hit it the nail on the head, is the risk appetite. And that's what is summarized to. It's really amount the C-suite. What is the aggregated risk appetite in that people with this, with the C title, and even into the board of director, because that will trigger the investment, whether it's just the security awareness training, which is very, a cup of coffee, a cost of a cup of coffee per month per user can start elevating that connaissance. But it's a cost to the C-suite, to the board of director. And this is where as a technologist, we fail miserably how to communicate where we're spending their money into effectively addressing those GRC objectives. And that's where I see the disconnect from the communications. One hand, these are technical things, in general, right? I don't understand. You always come and ask me, for money.
Oh yeah,
and it becomes a cybersecurity black hole.
You're right. It is a real problem. Having been a chief procurement officer, one of the things that I used to be very popular for in my organization was they can never balance the budgets, right? So there's always a shortfall in the tech group, and I always used to say, just give me whatever, a $10 million bogey, we'll go find the money somewhere, because they do want to fund these things, and everybody's always short of money, big or small. So, but I want to go back to one of the things that you briefly touched on, and this is something that I think is really fascinating, which is really, how do you be the human in the loop? So I was at a conference last fall. I was at the Sourcing Industry Group conference, and there was a senior executive from JP Morgan talking about intelligence. What is intelligence? And the four primary types of intelligence. And so I've sort of taken that concept further to say, well, what is AI intelligent? What can they do that, where are they intelligence across the four types of human intelligence? So we know that they're very, very good at logical thinking, right? So basically matching and consuming a lot of data, and also very good at some of the cognitive skills, but they're not good at everything. So we know that the technologies are getting better every day, and people are scared, right? I mean, will I have a job? Will my children have a job? Will my grandchildren have a job? And so, how do you be the human in the loop here? What are your thoughts on that?
So yeah, you tied it back into your early conversation about deep neural network. That's one of the model, right? The reinforcement learning model, like Google put out TensorFlow, open source, being out there. But
so I just want to pause. When you say a reinforcement learning model, I think I know what you mean, but could you just explain that a little bit more?
Sure. It's basically, that's where the general term with all those model behind the deep neural network, and basically is a way to train the AI in a way giving its reward, so the AI model can continue to improve based on the reward they're getting. And basically, it's it's like one of the analogies, like you give a treat to a dog, and eventually they will repeat the same thing over and over again because you give them a treat. AI is no different. That's exactly in a way that is reinforcement learning model is, as long as human in the loop, that the subject matter expertise, including within the organizations, as I kept saying, that even the help desk people, the entry level of IT, they can continue to train the AI model without they knowing it. Because once they see the alert comes in, and they, that a lot of it's to do with false positive or false negative,
Right.
But how they treat that alert into positive or negative, and then that's the signal, send it back into the reinforcement learning model.
Right. And then the model slightly changes in order to adapt to a better answer, correct. A better process.
Correct. That is where the domain specific comes in. Yeah. So this is where why we need to look at this, and there is no data that can train this type of at this point in time, and the research is being done in the cyber insurance for the cyber insurance and the cyber risk. University of Limerick can talk about there is no data. The GAO in 2024 General Availability Office, it came out with a report that there is no such a data to train the data risk at this point for the AI perspective. See, this is why we have to. And going back into, tied it back into the ethical and governance process, we don't believe that should be out in the public area, in the internet. That should be very specific to your organization. Again, going from the top-down perspective, what is your company wanted to do, and how do you want to train that AI and put that human in the loop in perspective? I'm not talking about just one human. It's just the interaction based on the stakeholders, how they're interacting. And that's what we did in the open source. First is we going from the fundamental, how do we collect the data from existing cybersecurity and IT solutions? What do you do with it? And that's where the KPI being defined. Now, once you identify there's gaps, you want to put a project around it. Then this is where the contribution coming from the group start to communicate what is good, what is bad. And that is the process the AI, the augmented intelligence, will start be learning. And human in the loop will start contributing what is the conversations and communication around my organization specifically.
And I always think about an AI assisted surgery, right? So you would probably not want to rely on a machine to do your open heart surgery because every body is different, right? And unexpected things happen. So the theory is, and I think it's going to hold for a very long time, that as with most things, you do need a human in the loop in order to check the sort of the logic or respond to the totally unexpected, which is something that AI would need to be trained to do, but would not necessarily be able to take the initiative. I mean, I think about 5 years ago, I was in what should have been an airplane crash, actually. And had we not had the pilots completely ignoring the specs of the plane and making it do something it was never intended to, we wouldn't have landed anywhere, right? So there's always that element of surprise and the unexpected and stepping outside of the norms. And that's why being the human in the loop, I think it's a very important concept. I mean, we've seen this with over the millennium, right? Where people who do not choose to continue to upskill themselves, do not have a curious mind, and are complacent in the roles that they have, and don't strive to learn new things, do get left behind. There's no doubt about it. And there's no doubt that AI will replace a lot of, especially the routine jobs in the same way that RPA did, or think about Henry Ford and factory lines, right? This is already arrived. And so being the human in the loop, to me, it's the people who are joining us here today, you have curious minds, you are interested in learning what's out there. Because without this, continuous learning loop, I don't know how I would stay relevant either. So anyhow, so I think that it is a very valid point, and I think that being the human in the loop is something that you should encourage yourself to do, and also your own team, right? So how do they become the ones that are retained, if in fact AI is going to replace much of what they do? And so that combination of how does your organization function and what is your value add, right? It's incredibly important and never has been more important.
Yeah, and you touched on the IBM Watson. We stopped deploying AI in 2018 with the IBM Watson. And
Right.
I remember one of the article came out talking about that, AI is going to replace 90% of the lawyers. And I think that's even earlier than that. And my son was going to go into law. So I sent that article to him. And his reaction is, thanks, Dad. Thanks for the encouragement, right? I said, son, you got to look at it from the other perspective.
Yeah.
It might replace the 90% of the people, just like you said, Linda, who are complacent. They don't want to improve. But you can be that 10%. And you think about that with that 10%, the human in the loop now, what we call, can actually train this AI model. Think about how much money you can make if you are one of the 10%. So I said that's
but getting there is going to be tricky, right? Because it assumes that you already have expertise. So that is going to be the biggest challenge for people and organizations. If you take out that kind of entry level progression role, then how do you get the experts besides stealing them from somebody else? And that answer won't last for forever.
And also that thank goodness for that AI, because now AI can help us to do a lot of research, educationals, and now of course these are the things that when I talk to my students, everywhere in the world, it depends on how hard you want to get to that level. What is your goal? How do you want to achieve it? Because now, back then, remember, we have to go to the library, look at the books and do the research, and now it's just at the fingertip. So just imagine all this time being saved, going into the library, and these are the way that it being compensated in the sense that you kind of can get yourself up to speed faster. It doesn't have to be, and even though I've been doing this for the last 25 years, but at the same time, we still look into the subject matter expertise, because it's the nitty gritty of those details that set me apart from that subject matter expertise or just a generalist. As I keep telling my team is like, I got to know what you guys are doing. I got to know enough to tell you you're right or you're wrong, or at least have my sense, and that's go back into the knowledge. And this is how I have to learn all of these. But I don't plan to be a subject matter expertise. I take classes, learn as much as I can. But one thing that what we do is, again, going back into, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're just trying to make it more efficient, make it better and perform better. And same thing, it goes back into, IT in the traditional network, building infrastructure network. There's a lot of holes. There's a lot of gap up to, it's like this has been around for 25 years. And I call myself a real digital transformer because I went from analog network, I built analog network, and now today I build digital network. It's 100% digital. I was very fortunate to be in that era in the 90s. And with that perspective, a lot of fundamental has not changed.
Yeah.
It's just how we being applied it into the real everyday business. And some of them might not be possible. For example, in cybersecurity, everybody wants to deploy zero trust architecture because that's the best practice that is being recommended. But how many companies can afford ditching all the Cisco, Palo Alto gear, but they might be spending tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars building this infrastructure? And they could not just, throw them away and start over again.
Oh, I hear you. I mentioned I was a chief procurement officer in a bank. So I reported to the chief operating officer in the last, one of the last roles I had. And so, the technology budget, they only had about 10%, 15% of the budget was discretionary.
That's pretty good already.
Yeah, most of it was supporting existing infrastructure, right? You can't just throw the stuff out, right? So, so basically trying to find ways to free up, people and resources and cash. It's not like everybody's, basically we're fully deployed and we're doing the best with everything. If you can use these tools to free up capacity to do other things, I think that's one of the greatest wins that we can offer. I also like your advice on being a leader practitioner. I mean, even as a senior vice president, believe me, I knew my trade, right? I always wanted to maintain that expertise because, things change. I ended up starting my own business. So good thing I was not just a senior vice president like many of them are, which are very good at networking with their peers, but maybe don't know a whole lot about. A lot of them are not very deep in their own area. And I don't think that's a winning strategy today. I think you do need to know.
And so that's why I even come to you for the subject matter expertise advisors, right? These are the things that how we can share from the educational perspective and then turn it into the real practice. And then a lot of times that I'm not a consultant or I'm just more on the engineering side. It's, as I keep saying, how do we take out what is being invested and then apply the data analysis, data analytic to define the KPI and let the numbers speak for itself.
Yep. Fact-based and risk-informed decision-making. So anyhow, any last-minute questions from anyone that we did not cover? Okay. On that note, we could talk for hours. I love talking to you, Stanley. I think you're such an interesting person. You have such broad expertise. We didn't get to talk about quantum computing, so I'm hoping you'll come back.
Yes.
We'll do it again.
It'll be my honor to come back. Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you very much for joining us today. And, best of luck and let's stay in touch. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay,
thanks, Linda. Bye-bye.